Join me this year at Exosphere, the alternative education platform where unique learning experiences cultivate the discipline, knowledge, and curiosity for building new enterprises that solve real problems. Its second boot camp, designed to accommodate people from all stages of life with a diversity of experience and ideas, happens from March to June 2014 in Santiago, Chile. I'll be there as a full-time fellow, as will a whole faculty and residents with experience in coding, design, development, marketing, and emerging technology to help you develop your business and yourself. You can find more details and apply at exosphe.re until January 15th. Season 4 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, Polar Inertia, a journal of nomadic and popular culture, online at polarinertia.com, and Medivate, a community and set of tools to help you build the kind of meditation practice you'd like to have, online at medivate.com. So this is a question I've been saving for you. Why is it that Danes speak English so well?
I guess we have to.
Because it's a small country? Because you have to learn it early? Because why?
Yeah, exactly. Because
both of those.
Because who would want to learn Danish? I know I'm the last person in the world who should be saying this, because I have listeners who actually learn Danish, and maybe that's why I make the podcast, because I think it's so incredible that people want to learn my language, because the only thing you can use it for is for getting to know Danes.
Kind of for the rest of Scandinavia, right? You can sort of understand Norway and Sweden. Can you not? Or how does that work? That's another thing people will be curious about. Is there intercompatibility?
If you know Danish, can you understand Swedish? Is that the question? Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I can understand Swedish, but that's because I practiced it. It wasn't so easy for me, really. So
everybody has a different answer on that question of how if they can understand Scandinavian languages. But this is, by the way, Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you here from, what neighborhood are we in? Is this still Nørrebro?
Yeah, Nørrebro.
That's the pronunciation you can help me with. Nørrebro? Nørrebro?
Yeah, very good. Nørrebro.
I'm working on it. I've had difficulties with that before in this show. But I'm speaking with Louise Sand, who does the Copenhagencast. She produces this podcast. She has been making it for the past 2 years. It is a language podcast. It's if you want to learn Danish, it's the podcast you want to go to. And it's also a cultural show. I've learned a lot about Danish culture and life in Copenhagen from the Copenhagencast. Now, tell me, you've taught Danish before, right? What's your Danish teaching experience?
In regards to
anything, I guess. What experience did you have teaching people Danish in any way before you began this show?
My most important experience is having fun. You know, I have fun when I teach language. I have fun with people. When I'm not bored, they are not bored. So I got to know incredible people from all over the world, who most of them came here on 3-year contracts for international companies. And they wanted to pick up a little bit of Danish to make their stay richer. So that was my job, to teach them a little bit of Danish. And in many cases I started from their point of view. So if someone is working with perfume or oil, then I would teach them to talk about that.
Now, was this your job, teaching Danish at this time?
That was my full-time job at the time.
How did you get into teaching Danish? How did you decide to pursue that?
That was not a decision.
Oh, really?
No, that was something that I had to do because I wanted to do something else. I wanted to teach Spanish. I have a degree in Spanish. I lived in Madrid and worked there, and I worked so hard to get the level sufficient to teach Spanish. But then there was really not much work here in Copenhagen.
Is there not much demand to learn Spanish within Copenhagen?
There is some, but most of it is within the government rules schools. High school and some high school programs for adults that they can also join. I worked there, but I wanted to work in companies. I wanted to work in Danish companies who had some employees that needed By the way, let me introduce Alice.
She'll be here with us.
She didn't learn Danish yet because she's only 6 months.
Right. Danish is the first language Danes learn, but English is soon after, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you get it in when you're 5, 6, 7?
My girl Elizabeth, she's already saying a few words in English. She's only 4.5.
From you speaking it at home?
She hears music and she sees television.
This is part of the question, I suppose, why Danes speak English so well. I guess there is so much English language culture that comes into the country, right? I mean, that's part of everybody's experience growing up?
Yeah, I think so.
And
also because, the soap operas are not synchronized. They are texts.
Right, so subtitled instead of dubbed, as we would say in America.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there is a constant input. It's easy to get the image here, visiting, that every Dane speaks English very well, but I've been told that that's not necessarily true. Some speak it better than others, but you get, as a visiting American, you get the sense, everybody here is perfect at English. That's not necessarily the case, is it?
Well, that depends on if it has to sound good or it just has to be understandable.
Everybody's at least understandable, though. It seems like everybody can have an interaction.
Yeah, I think so. Most people are. Perhaps some are shy.
I see. Yeah, that's a trait I've heard of being not necessarily common, but known in the Danish population as a certain shyness as well.
Yes, because even though they may have a really nice vocabulary and perhaps they can even write in English, they may be shy because they think it doesn't sound good when they speak.
Right. Well, it's a perfect way for a shy person to begin learning a language by listening to a podcast, because they can download it, hear it, and practice it for themselves for a little while and build up some confidence. So why did you want to begin teaching through the form of the podcast?
I was inspired by a friend who is from Japan. She has traveled all over the world and she's now living in the States with her American husband, and she made a Japanese podcast for people learning Japanese. I stumbled upon that when I was trying to learn Japanese myself, and I contacted her. We became friends. We exchanged language teaching via Skype. Once a week I taught her Spanish. She taught me Japanese. And I just felt that I had so much more to give because I had enjoyed the job as a Danish teacher so much. I was missing it. I started another job. And I was missing my teaching experience. I was missing the fun. I was missing the people. And I felt that I had much more to give. And I said, I'm going to try it.
Now, this podcast, your friend's podcast, I've heard it too, japancast.net. And when you were... What was the motivation to begin learning Japanese? Was it pure interest in the way the language worked, or had you already decided, I want to go visit Japan, I'd better learn some Japanese?
I just, like some people, they just play an instrument and then they learn one more and then they learn one more. They don't know why they do it. They just keep playing new instruments. I think it's like that with languages for me.
It becomes easier to pick up the next one after you've had the first. Now,
you can get a certain addiction to it. I think I have that.
I understand. I'm not very good at any of my other languages, but it is an addiction to study them because you get... it's addicting because you get instant feedback, don't you? You understand more, and you can say more.
And it's a delightful addiction, because there's some sort of... It's like a little trip abroad when you open your textbook or pick up your podcast or whatever it is. Or, you can browse the internet for words in your target language and just see what pictures pop up. And it's like, even if it's a Wednesday evening, I'm super tired. I've been working all day. I have 15 minutes before I should really be in bed. I can make a cup of coffee and I can travel to Japan. And I can study a little bit and I can, feel that sense of accomplishment. It's just wonderful. It's not a question of being extremely good at that language. Not at all. It's a question of giving yourself that little extra dream and yeah.
Yes, I think many people don't start learning a language. They don't even start, even in America, because they think, well, I'm not going to be perfect at it. I can't get fluent, or can't do it quickly, and that stops them. I only really started learning languages when I gave up fluency as a goal. I don't know how it was with you. You are fluent in a bunch of languages, so tell me.
100%, but that's not my goal anymore.
If it is your goal, it's too frustrating. Perfect fluency. Because the native speakers have too much of an advantage. They just are born into it. But what do you think of as your goal when you're learning languages? Just constant progress, just a little more all the time, or just enjoyment?
What is my goal?
Do you think of a goal? That's more the question is, do you think of it in terms of a goal, or just that's something you do, a habit?
Perhaps my goal is to be able to not have a goal in mind.
It's a good goal. And tell the listeners, I mean, in what order did you learn your additional languages? You first spoke Danish, and then you started studying English like every Dane. But what came after that?
I first learned English, then German, then French, and then Portuguese, and then Spanish. I actually tried learning Hindi, but I got tired of it because the materials were too poor. And even when I found a teacher, it wasn't very, very good. It seemed like that wasn't the thing for me, so I started Japanese instead. But I just want to say that it's really, really difficult not to have a goal in mind. It's much more difficult than people think. You might think that, you might think that it's easy to just study for fun, but actually it's difficult. Because you get caught up, and when you study, you get so excited, and you start thinking, if I study more, then I'll be good in a week. If I do this, then I'll learn that, and then I'll be able to speak. I want to do that. And that's when you start to put it on yourself like a punishment.
I see.
And that's when it stops being fun.
Right. If I just labor these hours per day.
Exactly. It's so hard to keep that playfulness in your learning. And that's what I'm trying to do. For myself when I learn, and for my listeners who are learning Danish. And that's the feedback I'm getting. That people write to me, we didn't think learning Danish could be relaxing and fun. Everybody was telling me I should be learning Danish because I'm living here. And I just really hated it. I couldn't do it. But now I'm doing it and I'm having fun. And I mean, it's not necessarily a question of sitting down and studying. If you are, for example, in Denmark, you can be learning all the time.
Right. The opportunities are everywhere, it's true. But if you speak English as a native language, it becomes too tempting to just speak English. I can imagine that's a common problem with foreigners here. It's like, well, I'll just speak English for a while, and then they fall into years of that.
Yeah, but even if you're speaking English, it's also a question of awareness. Perhaps you pass a poster on the street that's really nice poster, well designed, and it has some text, and you look at that text and it inspires you. It's also learning.
There are a few well-designed posters in Copenhagen. I notice a lot of the posters are pretty good looking here, so you do want to understand them. I was speaking with an American the other day who's lived here 20 years. For the first 6 years in Denmark, he just ignored the fact that they speak Danish here and didn't bother learning anything. And then he started studying. He speaks it now, but he said that what's interesting about Denmark is it's not a country where people are used to hearing their native language spoken badly. In America especially, but in every English-speaking country, there's a whole culture of speaking English badly. It's normal almost. I mean, like native speakers don't speak it perfectly, but it's... Tell me what it was like when you first heard foreigners speaking Danish. Was it unusual to hear somebody still learning the language? Hearing another.
I just want to help them. I change actually the way I speak a little bit when I'm speaking with someone who's not perfect in Danish, and not all Danes are able to do that. So some just speak, like they would speak to anybody else, and then it's hard for the foreign person to communicate. So I tend to slow down a little bit, just a little bit. Choose my words with care. So try to choose words that I think they will know. And I like to listen to that accent. I think it's like a different music in the language.
I see. It's, I suppose, the same way that I speak English to an English learner, somebody who's still studying. You do limit your vocabulary somewhat, and you try to be clear as possible. I mean, that's when you're doing the podcast, when you're making example dialogues and sentences, I guess that's part of the goal is, it's the balance to strike is, it's got to be real, but it's also got to be simple. Is that difficult to strike that balance?
Yeah, so in the podcast I tend to do the opposite a little bit. I try to choose phrases that would not appear in a textbook. I try to choose something that is something that I know that somebody would say in real life. I try to choose real language. So I tend to go for the opposite because I think people should have the chance in a safe surrounding, with the headphones on, listening to the podcast. That's the right surrounding to be exposed to something that's complicated and not understandable, because then I break it down and then you can get the feeling, that seems so impossible to understand. Now I understand it. Wow, that's cool. So that's actually two different approaches. One when I meet a foreign person, and another one when I make the podcast.
Right, I see. You mentioned when you tried to learn Hindi, the materials were not good enough to actually make progress in Hindi. And this is a thing I've heard about. It's a complaint I've heard about languages, certain languages. A friend of mine was learning Tagalog, the language of the Philippines, and he couldn't find good material. So eventually he was just practicing with his girlfriend, but not being able to find a textbook that was workable as a problem. Did it seem like before you started Copenhagencast, there wasn't much a foreigner could learn from on the internet as far as learning Danish?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Because your podcast seems like it's really the only game in town, as we say. It's the only show with a lot of episodes that covers a lot of subjects. So why do you think there has been so little? Is it because Danish is the language of a small country, or that just nobody had thought to do a podcast like yours before, or what?
I'm not sure about what I'm saying now, but I think that most of the Danish courses in Denmark are government programs, and they are academic, and that's a different approach. It's not modern, and it's not what people need. This is not a question of bad will or anything. It's just a tradition. And I think that in a few years this will probably change.
It's about to change, you think?
Because that's a tendency I'm seeing in the internet, that language learning from what it was when I started out learning languages and to what it is today, there's so much more opportunity to learn well, because you have so much more access to information, sound, writing, everything. And you can produce the most wonderful learning materials with all the technologies we have and with all the access we have to culture and language. It's like all the opportunities are just there waiting. So I don't know why nobody did it.
It's interesting because, we have now videos and podcasts and Skype and everything that, as you say, the internet enables. Just 15 years ago, if you wanted to learn a language, you had to go enroll in a course. And if there wasn't one, tough, essentially. When I used to live in Santa Barbara in California, a smaller town where there weren't any Korean classes available, and I wanted to study Korean, so it was like I was forced to discover what was on the internet. But the study of Japanese that you did you find any native speakers around here as well? Are there any in Copenhagen?
Yeah. At the time I started Japanese, I was working with communication in a fund of hedge funds. I'm not very proud of that today.
Everybody needs to make a living.
I didn't know what would happen to the hedge funds back then. But right outside the office is a tourist spot, and almost every week there would arrive a bus full of Japanese to take pictures, and sometimes I would just go to buy some chewing gum on the other side of the street. Said to my boss, I'm taking a little break, or I would go buy chewing gum and speak to the Japanese.
You would just use what you could use, and what was their reaction?
They got so happy.
Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. So nice. We also have Museum of Modern Art. You should really go there when you're here. Louisiana, you probably.
I want to.
It's the best. I think I might be going there today, actually. It's really children friendly, so I go there a lot with my kids, and there's always some Japanese people there that you can meet and talk to.
I should go there and just say hello, say konnichiwa to them. How long were you studying Japanese before you made your trip to Japan?
I think just 1 year, actually, yeah.
So when you got to Japan, what was the experience like? I was in Japan with this show last year, so I might have had a similar experience, but using the language in the country for the first time, what did that feel like?
That was just nice. Already in the airport, I started saying something to some of the people working there, because we were waiting in a really, really, really big line to pass some sort of control that I didn't really know what was about. And then we were handed some sheets that we were supposed to fill out, and the Japanese employee came to collect them. And I wasn't finished with mine yet, and I knew that I could say "mada," and he understood it, and I was just in heaven. I was still in the airport and already speaking Japanese.
That is one of the qualities that fuel the addiction of language learning, is that moment where a native speaker understands you, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the best. I had a listener writing to me because I made an episode about onsdags. I don't know if you heard that one.
I've heard them all, not all of them. I need to hear them all more than once, though. That's the thing about language podcasts. Once is not good enough.
Once is not enough, no. Anyways, onsdags is a cake with cinnamon that you have on Wednesdays. So the baker only makes them on Wednesdays. And then one of my listeners, she was visiting relatives in Denmark, and it was Wednesday. And she said to her relative, could you pull over because I will go to the baker and get onsdags for all of us. And they dropped their jaw. Wow, how did you know about this? It's amazing. You've been studying. Wow. And she sent me this email. Just, she had this great experience.
I'm going to have to buy some on Wednesday. I'll be here through Wednesday, so I'll need to. What does this cake taste like for those who don't know?
It's like a bread roll. With we call it snegle. It means snail.
Snail.
Yeah, because it looks like a snail house.
It looks like the shell of a snail.
Shell of a snail.
I see. Huh.
And it's got cinnamon and sometimes some frosting.
I see. It does seem like this is the town to go to if you want pastries, baked goods, tasty bread. I mean, tell me if that's been true in your travels, but your homeland seems to have some of the best.
Yeah, maybe. I like to try the ones when I go abroad also, but yeah, we have some really nice stuff.
Now, when you get emails about Copenhagencast, is it usually foreigners living here who are grateful for the opportunity to learn, or is it people who want to come, or what is the breakdown of who it is? People outside Denmark, inside Denmark, or what?
Well, I think around half of them are in the States, and then a quarter of them are in Denmark, and the other are from Germany, even China, Britain.
This is fascinating because you get an opportunity to understand why a whole lot of people are learning Danish. And what do they tell you about why they're learning?
Many of them have relatives or Danish roots. Many of the Americans that write to me. And they miss coming to Denmark more. I think they use my podcast also for that. And some of them have, a lot of my listeners have married Dane. And some of them are moving here or have already moved here.
Right.
Some of them come here on contracts, like the ones I was teaching when I was working for a language school. Yeah, so that's it.
I was talking earlier before we were recording about the fact that I'll be moving to Korea myself in a couple of years, and I've been studying Korean in the run-up to that. And it seems like Korean and Danish have some similarities, not grammatically, but in that they're languages of smaller countries, and people are... It's sort of fascinating that when somebody is studying the language, right? It's with Koreans, it's always like, wow, you're actually studying. Are you sure you're studying Korean? Is it the same with Danish? When a foreigner studies it, a Dane might be surprised, like, really? You're studying? Why is that? Is it a curious thing that people would study Danish?
If people have moved here, we usually expect them to try to learn.
Right. But if they don't live here?
But if they don't live here, and if they only have... For example, here's a good case. My husband's family is German. They live in Hamburg. And my husband's mother came from Hamburg to Denmark because she married a Dane, and so they lived here. But then her sisters and brothers, they took Danish classes to be able to speak with their nieces and nephews. And people tend to find that really impressive because they live in Hamburg.
Right, they're not here. It makes it a lot more difficult to learn Danish when you're not in Denmark. It seems like it's because this is the one country where you hear it. I mean, when somebody moves here and they think, like the fellow I was mentioning before, they think that they can get by with just English, what would you tell somebody about what you get out of living here when you speak Danish? It seems like you can only speak English, but what is made richer about the experience of Denmark when you can actually speak the language?
Well, you get the smiles on people's faces, and you get the sense of humor.
You get to hear Danish jokes.
Exactly.
I hear that the Danish sense of humor is pretty distinctive, and that it's subtle, and that you do need to have a good grasp of Danish to really understand when people are making a joke. Do you think that's true?
I think it's true, and I think you won't pick up the jokes just like that. But I try to in my podcast. I know this is it can be hard to pull it off, I try to tell people little phrases that they can use that will make people laugh. So.
When I was preparing for this trip, one of the ways I prepared was I was searching out materials about Copenhagen in other languages that I studied. So there's this show from Spanish television. What's it called? Madrileños por el mundo. And it's about people from Madrid who live around the world. One episode was about people from Madrid who live in Copenhagen. And it's all in Spanish. So I was studying here as I was studying Spanish. But it reminded me that it is a favorite technique of mine to study one language through another that I'm learning. So studying Japanese in Spanish, I've tried to do on the internet and that kind of thing. Is that a technique you've also used, is to study one language through another one you're studying?
I've not used that technique, but I've used a similar one where I study a subject I love in another language.
Right. I guess that was more what I was doing with that television show, because it was about somewhere I was interested in a different language. So you seek out the subjects you would want to know about anyway and study them in a language that you want to learn.
Yeah, and sometimes I get the Spanish translation instead of getting the English original, just so I can enjoy that.
I see. Now, we mentioned understanding the jokes in a culture, and I wonder, when did you start? Do Danish people start studying English so early that they always get the jokes in English? Do you know what I mean? Like, is that a process? Do you remember when you started understanding humor in English?
I think that people understand the sort of humor that you find on American television shows because you're so exposed to it.
They understand a certain particular kind of American humor, but when they watch a British television show, it's a different story.
I think so, because when I hear people speaking English, Danish people speaking English in the street to someone they know, or where I work, I hear them speaking with an American accent. I think I do that myself also a little bit, and I hear the sort of things that they say. It's the same kind of humor that you find on those shows.
What do you find foreigners struggle with the most in Danish? What are the hard parts of Danish, particularly for a Danish learner?
The pronunciation is the hardest part.
Yes, I was struggling with Nørrebro.
The vowels. The pronunciation is the hardest part, and the hardest part of the pronunciation is the vowels, because there are 8 vowels, and each of them has various pronunciations, and those are triggered by the letters around them.
I think so. It's contextual.
It's contextual. You need to know, and then there's exceptions to all the rules.
Yes.
So
that's true of English as well, though. I mean, that's even harder, I would imagine, in English.
Yeah, I know. In English, there's exceptions also. So the pronunciation is definitely the hardest part. And then I think that if you do get a good grasp of the pronunciation, then you'll have a hard time with the spelling. Yes. Because they are so different.
I've heard Danes tell me that Danish spelling is no guide at all to pronunciation for a learner. They say, don't even look at that. Don't try to read it. Just listen to people. It's better to listen first, read later.
Yeah, that's what I always say to my listeners, and I put it on my website and really try to emphasize, listen before you read.
Do you think this is true? I feel like countries that are smaller, and especially when they're smaller and wealthier, the population tends to be more outward looking. They travel more and they learn more foreign languages. Do you think that's true? It seems like it's true in Denmark. It seems like there's a lot of traveling here and a lot of language learning.
I guess it requires a certain amount of wealth to be able to travel.
Right, but the smallness of the country as well. If you're from a small country, you're like, I like this, but I guess the world is big, so I should see.
Because, if you're from such a big country, you first need to travel your own country.
I guess that maybe keeps a lot of Americans from traveling abroad, because it's like, well, I haven't seen 47 of the states, But at the same time, that's a bad thing, because it's you still have to see another country to really understand the contrast between your country and the rest of the world. I mean, I've heard the same of Russia and China. These are big countries, so the people inside them tend to think of their country as the huge context around them that becomes their world. But in Denmark, I would imagine, tell me if this is true, you grow up with an awareness that there is a large world around you, do you not?
Yes, I agree with that. Certainly.
We talked a bit off mic before about the places Danes like to travel generationally. You said it was France in your parents' generation. Now, where do Danes travel?
my generation, the ones between 30 and 40, when you have children, like I do, you change the way you travel because you want to go somewhere comfortable. And then people tend to go to some of the Spanish islands, to those hotels where you have a lot of services that is suitable for a family.
It's one of those things that you have to explain to listeners from other parts of the world. In Europe, you do have a lot of countries around you, so it's sort of like you have almost too many options for where to travel, not too few, like you would in some more remote places.
One of the new trends is that just 10 years ago, Germany was not very trendy. 20 years ago, it was unpopular. It was still in the minds of people, the history, you know.
They still thought of it as divided and troubled.
I mean, it's still in the people's minds. My husband grew up in Denmark, being half German and meeting that prejudice in his friends' parents. Because it was just not something that you had a good feeling about. But that has changed completely. So now German is cool, cultural, trendy. People go to Berlin, Hamburg, and they love it. So my generation, and even the ones in the between 20 and 30, they love to go to Germany.
I was warned before coming here not to use the German pronunciation of Copenhagen, which I guess is more like Copenhagen. Yes, someone said don't say that because they don't want to be reminded of Germany in Denmark. But I guess, as you say, Germany is looked upon more kindly nowadays than it has been.
Even admire Germany. Yes, for the culture and for the economy.
I've heard that Danes study first English and then a few years later German study commences. Is it for everybody? That everybody studies German in school as well as English?
I don't know if they've changed that. My children, my oldest girl is starting school in 2 years, and by then I will know about all these things. But right now I'm not updated. But when I was a child, we all studied German, all of us.
I hear they don't like it much either. English is fun, German less fun?
Yes, because there's so much grammar, and maybe because the English is learned in a more intuitive way because they are so exposed to American TV shows. And
they might never watch a German television show unless they were interested in Germany.
So the German is learned in a more classroom style, and I think that's what they don't like about it.
A more stern academic style, which you associate with Germany sometimes. But what are the popular languages people like to learn in Denmark? Do you have a sense of what languages people just enjoy studying here?
Spanish is very popular.
Because of that vacationing, or? Yes,
and food and the films and the music and the dance and all that. Not only Spain, but also Latin America. So Spanish is very popular. I graduated in Spanish from the University of Copenhagen, and I just did that because I was interested in it. But I was lucky because there was a lot of demand in the government schools. But as I said before, not so much in the companies, which is where I wanted to work.
Exactly. You didn't want to work in a government school. Are there many native Spanish speakers living here in Denmark? When you were studying, could you find any to talk to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I could find many, acquaintances.
Do they come here to study and things like that, or is there much exchange?
The ones I know have all come here because they married a Dane.
That seems like a common reason to move to Denmark. I've met a few people who have that reason.
True, yeah.
Then again, I'm moving to Korea with my Korean girlfriend in a couple of years, so that's I'm essentially on the same plan. Now, tell me, if you've learned English and you've learned German, does Spanish come pretty easily at that point after Portuguese and everything like that? I mean, is it true what they say about learning European languages, is that they just get easier?
It is true, yeah, it is.
How much easier? I mean, is it to the point where learning Spanish was just like that compared to learning English?
Yeah, it was just like that.
Really?
My only really hard challenge was getting rid of my Portuguese pronunciation.
Yes, you learned Portuguese first, which will, to an American, sound a little bit strange because we always learn Spanish first. But you say it's actually easier to go Portuguese first. Is that so?
Yes, because the Portuguese pronunciation is so different, and it's so special. I really think that, you have to get that first, and then afterwards. The Spanish pronunciation is really, really simple, I think. So it's much more straightforward.
Right. Certainly, compared to Danish, at least from my perspective, Spanish is very straightforward indeed. It also is a perspective I want to get of learning English. From the Danish perspective, what is difficult about English? I mean, you started so early that it's made easier by that, but what's hard in English?
Well, the hard part for me is to have enough nuance in my vocabulary and to be diplomatic when I speak. Because when I speak in Danish, I'm much more direct. It's a way of speaking.
Everybody is?
Yes. The English language sounds much more harsh when you're being direct. So if you translate something directly from Danish to English, it will sound brutal, really. And I'll give you an example from this interview. Just a few moments ago, we were talking about government schools, and I'm rewinding in my head what I said, and I'm not feeling good about it.
Oh, what did you say? Because I didn't notice any harshness, but...
I said something about the academic style is not very good. And I think in English you would find a much nicer way to say that didn't sound so offensive.
I see. I guess you're right. We would probably talk around it a bit. The academic style is not necessarily suited to the way people learn today, something like that. But saying not very good gets to the point. I mean, in Danish you would just say the equivalent of not very good.
You might say it's not the best.
That's something you might say in English as well. It's almost like when you're very advanced in English and you're learning how to put the right nuance on your sentences, that's equally as hard as being at a low level of a completely new language, right? I mean, starting a language and perfecting a language, that's the same level of difficulty in a way, just different level of ability, you might say?
I agree. I view it as a learning curve. In the beginning, it's so gratifying, it's so rewarding, it's so wonderful because you're making progress all the time. Wow, I'm speaking this language, I'm learning from week to week, I can see my progress. Then you get a certain level, you can communicate, and then you want to start perfectioning that, and then the progress is slow.
Right. You spend 20 years on that final 10% of the language, don't you?
I think so, yeah.
What do you notice when people are learning Danish? I mean, when you meet foreigners who are advanced at Danish, what do they have to work on to gain those nuances, to properly put the right nuance on things? What is that last 10% in Danish? What does that consist of? What do you notice people still need to work on even when they're excellent at Danish?
The idiomatic expressions, of course, and also the slang, the words that are seasonal.
What's a good example of that?
In Danish, we would say that something is on the wallpaper. And that means that this is something that is on our mind that we're going to talk about.
And in Danish, how do you say that? Something's on the wallpaper.
You'd say, hvad er der på tapetet i dag? What's on the wallpaper today?
One more time slowly so we can hear the vowels there.
Okay. Hvad er der på tapetet i dag?
Hvad er der
På
tapetet.
And that's wallpaper.
Tapetet.
Yeah.
I dag.
Today.
I see. Now, the listeners can hear one of your children in this interview, and if they listen to the Copenhagencast, they can hear another one in the background. Tell me a little bit about what ideas you have about the language learning your kids will do. I mean, there's a certain amount you want to encourage them, right, to learn as much as possible. Or what do you think? What do you hope for them as far as language learning?
I hope for them that they do what makes what's right for them.
Right.
As for languages, my oldest daughter, she's playing with language all the time. She's making up words. She has the most incredible comments. I have a whole book just full of the comments she's been making since she started speaking. I keep writing it down because she says the most incredible things. Actually, I was thinking about making an episode with some of those things that she said because she says incredible things. Just one example. There was a pop song that was very popular a couple of years ago. And she said, Mor, hun synger i himlen. Mom, she's singing in heaven. It's so nice.
It's got to be fascinating to watch a kid acquire language, right? Because that teaches you something about the way language works, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah.
What sort of thing do you learn about the mechanics of language from hearing her?
The first phrase she ever made, my daughter, the eldest one, was mor ikke farlig. That means mom is not dangerous.
Fair enough, and good to know.
It's a children's song where they sing, the bear is not dangerous, the bear is not dangerous. So she started replacing the bear with mom, dad, herself, and all kinds of other words. So
you hear her combining she knows these different words, and then you see her combining them.
She learned the phrase from a song, and then she started combining it to other phrases.
I see. That's something that my dad has told me, that while I was growing up, there was a time when he knew where I learned whatever I happened to say, but at some point I started learning too many things for him to know where I picked up each of the words. But it sounds like your daughter is still in that zone where you can trace back all the language she knows. Is that right?
Yeah, most of it, I think.
That process of trying out new combinations of words, making new sentences, that's pretty much the same thing as we do when we learn a new language, right? It's what she's doing when she's speaking Danish.
And especially, using lyrics to learn a language is something I recommend.
I have heard that recommended for a lot of languages. For Korean, the Korean pop music is so big in the world. They always say, listen to more Korean pop. And it's like, I don't know if I necessarily want to, but you do recommend it?
Yes, very much. That's how I learned Portuguese.
Portuguese music? I see. There's a lot of that.
Brazilian music. That's how I became able to pronounce as fast as the natives, so I could fool a taxi driver to think that I was Brazilian.
That is impressive. That it was from music. Who were you listening to? What type of music?
Brazilian popular music. Gilberto Gil, Marisa Monte.
There's a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah.
And is it to do with the repetition, just hearing the songs over and over again? It becomes internalized, or why is music so effective?
I think it's because it touches something very deep in you. It's like a mantra, or it's once it gets inside your brain, it stays there. I see. We have this word in English, earworms. Like it's the worm crawls in. Yes, exactly. You can't get rid of it. Some of those lyrics still stored in my brain.
I would imagine so. I would imagine you do. Are there Danish musicians you would recommend for listeners who are learning Danish? Well, who should they listen to?
An episode about this. Actually, I would like to get an interview with him. This is probably one of the most important Danish musicians, Kim Larsen.
Kim Larson?
Yeah, he makes really, really, really good lyrics and wonderful music. And ever since, he's been one of the most important Danish musicians since I was a little girl.
Oh, I see. He's been around a while then.
He's been around a while, yeah.
It's important to find a musician who, as you say, uses the language well. It shouldn't be just anybody,
No, I think it should be, definitely someone who uses the language well.
It's here trying to repeat after you and practice these Danish vowels. It reinforces a conclusion I came to a little while ago in language learning. It's true of Spanish, true of Korean, but American English is very consonant heavy. You're speaking hard consonants all the time, almost not pronouncing vowels. It seems like Spanish, Korean, Japanese, even Danish, you speak mostly vowels and not really consonants. Do you think that's possibly true?
I think it's true for Spanish and Japanese, but for Danish, I think it depends really much on the accent you have, and where you're from, and how fast you speak.
Oh, I see. So it's not necessarily true. It's more complicated. I see.
Perhaps that's because my knowledge of Danish is bigger.
Right. But because the vowel sounds are so difficult for foreigners, it's probably worth emphasizing that focus on the vowels, maybe. In any case, what I'm getting at is that I can keep myself learning a language if I tell myself things like that, like, okay, now you're going to focus specifically on the vowels. Now you're going to think specifically about these types of words. Now look only at the verbs, focusing on one particular part every so often, changing the way I regard a language or changing the thing I learn about it. What are your thoughts on varying your technique of language learning? What works for you?
I vary my techniques all the time because I get bored if I do the same.
Right.
At some point, I even got tired of flashcards, so I stopped doing it.
And you are a fan of flashcards?
I love flashcards.
What's so good about flashcards?
It helps you increase the amount of storage space in your brain.
Because it's small pieces at once, or?
Because you keep repeating the same thing, so you can just you can memorize so much more stuff than you would have imagined.
Do you use these for words or phrases or everything?
Words, phrases, yeah. It's really good to do it with phrases, because instead of composing your own phrases based on grammar rules, you fill up your brain with real life phrases, and that's a little bit like the music of the language or lyrics. Then you start making real phrases.
It's something to underscore, is the importance of hearing the way people actually speak. I would imagine in English, tell me if this is true or not, English as spoken by a native speaker is pretty different than the one you learn in the classroom, right?
Oh, it's been such a long time since I was in a classroom.
Were your teachers native English speakers?
No, they weren't.
Oh, really? Is that do you think it might be true even today?
Yes, it's true even today.
When I read about Japanese history, I read about the Meiji period in the late 19th century when they were letting a lot of Western influence in, and they actually considered, from what I've heard, getting rid of the Japanese language, converting to English entirely. And it would make it easier to go to Japan, but at the same time, I'm glad, despite my lack of command of Japanese, that they didn't do that. I'm happy they still use Japanese. And I'm not sure what it contributes that they still have the Japanese language, but what would you say it contributes to Denmark that Danish is still the language Danes use? English is widely spoken, but it's secondary. What does it contribute to the culture? And I know this sounds so broad, but what makes it more interesting? What makes Denmark more interesting because you speak Danish here?
In the perspective of a person visiting Denmark,
or from anybody's perspective.
In my perspective, the cultural scene would not be the same if we didn't have our own language. Because there are some things that we can only say in Danish, and we all know what we mean because it's so it's so loaded with meaning. That particular word or that particular expression or that way of making fun of a certain class or dialect, or the cultural scene. And recently, 10 years ago, if you really wanted a chance in the music business, you would make music with English lyrics. Right. But recently, Danish has become cool to Danes. Oh, yes. So we have a lot of interesting stuff going on in the cultural scene where the language is being used in fascinating ways. Really. So, yeah. That would be a shame if we didn't have the language.
Why do you think it's become cooler? Is it just people are a little tired of English at this point, or why has Danish become more popular with kids and with cultural types?
We've become more proud of it, and we don't just want to be copies of American pop music.
Right. That's a good thing. It does increase the amount of options somebody has. If they want to listen to music, Danish music is not just, well, that's just a clone of American music. It's a different thing. If it's in a different language, it's a way to help, as we say, a way to help learn the language too, is it not?
I think maybe it's a global trend helped by the internet, that if you really want, it seems like people are starting to understand that if you really want to do something special, then you shouldn't try to be like everybody else.
Right. Now you have to be different, or else, because you can access everything, so you have to have a reason for people to access what you're making. It's like with the Copenhagencast. You no doubt saw that there were very few options for people who wanted to learn Danish, so that opportunity was there.
Yeah, exactly. So you really have to try to search inside yourself and find your voice. And I think that's also reflecting in a small country like Denmark and the language, that people can see, wow, we have our own language. That's something special. We have 3 letters that you don't have in other languages. We have strange sounds.
Only 3 letters? Oh,
yeah, only 3. And maybe a few years ago you would have said, if I had been born in an English-speaking country, I would have been much better off. But that's not necessarily the case anymore.
Right. It's almost, I think about it as people say what an advantage it is to be born in America because you speak English natively, and English is such a globally spoken language. But then I think, isn't it better to be born in a country where you have a certain native language and then everybody learns English, so everybody's bilingual? I mean, it seems like that's more of an advantage in the 21st century. I would imagine you think the same way.
It's what you make of it, I think.
Now, what are the topics you've wanted to approach on future episodes of the Copenhagencast? What have people really wanted to know that you haven't covered yet, or things? What are the sort of currents in what people want to know about Danish and about Copenhagen culture that you want to move on to on the show?
I'm preparing an episode right now about a reporter who works for the traffic radio. She has been awarded a language award because she made up so much fascinating new vocabulary.
She's invented new Danish words.
She's invented words, and she's turned the traffic report into such a pleasure that even people on bikes listen to it just for fun. They don't need the information, but they love her voice and the things she says.
What's one of the words that she's invented? How do you invent a word in Danish?
Morgenkus, morning kiss. That's when two cars crash and no one gets damaged.
Oh, I see. So that's the kind of thing. She has a word for every type of incident that happens on the road, and it's all made of compounds of other Danish words, that sort of thing?
Exactly. For example, she has parkering på motorvejen, parking on the highway, which is when obviously there's a traffic
jam. Yes,
yeah.
Traffic. So it's one word. What you've just said was one compound word?
It's 3 words. Parkering på motorvejen.
Parking på motorvej?
Yeah. Flot. Meget flot.
Excellent. And I was speaking with a writer in Mexico City a few months ago, and she was saying she likes to write in English because English allows so much invention, so much making up words, putting together new forms. She thought Spanish didn't, that Spanish was more rigid. It was her native language, but she thought it doesn't allow the invention that English does. It sounds like Danish is getting a bit freer with what you can invent if this lady can make up traffic words like that. Do you think that's true?
I think it's true. And it's not just her, it's also all the Danes using the social media, inventing new ways of writing, new words, new spellings, and some of them are being adopted to the dictionary.
Oh, it's actually getting brought into. And is there some sort of Academy of Language in Denmark?
And they are adopting new words, and actually they are editing the official Danish dictionary once a year, and previously that was only once every 10 years. So that's just one of the things that's changing language with technology, because previously it was a printed version, so obviously you couldn't keep changing it all the time. It would be too expensive for people. But now everything is online, so you just adapt and change. Yeah. So you play with language more because of the technology.
It seems like it's a contrast to the French situation, where the government in France wanted to keep it the same legally, prevent much change from happening in the French language, and that didn't work out for them very well, did it? I mean, French hasn't grown. I don't know if you hear as much French these days as you once did. What's it like? Are there many francophones here in Denmark?
My parents' generation, yeah. They love French, they love France, they love the food, the red wine, the painters.
But now?
But now, my generation, no. France is not the big thing. I think language is very democratic in the sense that you can't control it. It's owned by the people.
Right.
And the more you let the people play with it, the more interesting it gets.
What's interesting about, specifically when I studied Korean, is I notice a lot of words brought in from English and adapted to the Korean way of pronunciation, the Korean usage. They change it into the sounds they have and into the forms they use. Does much get brought in from English or other languages into Danish?
Oh, yeah. Do you want a few examples?
Yes, of course I do.
Food processor.
Food processor.
Weekend.
What does that mean?
Weekend.
Weekend. This is a good way to learn it. It helps. Loan words help to learn pronunciation, don't they? Because you can. It's often when I was learning Korean at first, I would read a sign, and I would struggle to get through it because I was just learning the writing system, and I'd be like, sauna. What's the sound? Oh, sauna. Like the loan words trip me up now more than the other words do, because it's like I expect them to be completely rooted in Korean, and they're actually in my own language in some sense. But there's a lot of those in Danish.
Yeah, there is. There's lots and lots and lots of words like that. Job, for example.
Oh, is that just job? I see. So when they say that an English speaker has a good chunk of the vocabulary already for Danish, it is true. We have a decent start already. We just need to work on pronunciation, grammar.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in a business setting, we always talk. We tend to use more and more English words, and some people even say it's too much, because you could just say the Danish equivalent. Why do you want to say it in English? Oh, it sounds cooler. It sounds more business-like. It sounds more like,
global.
So instead of making a forslag, you make a business case.
Oh, I see.
Stuff like that.
Now, finally, when you are talking to a foreigner who has learned Danish or who's learning Danish, what are some of the signs that they've really made it over a hurdle, that they've reached a level of Danish that people don't usually reach? You talk about idiomatic expressions, you talk about elements of the culture, untranslatable things. What's a sign that somebody has really learned Danish well? When somebody understands something, what is that something?
Of course, when they are effortless, that's really a sign. But I think it's also interesting to see what is a sign that they will have success in their learning. And to me, that is the people that are curious and the people that are willing to take the risk and sound however it may sound.
Right, they have to risk sounding imperfect, very imperfect, which is, it sounds like it wasn't a struggle for you. You never feared sounding imperfect in the language.
True. I was always afraid of sounding imperfect, but I just had to try it anyway. And I think I have sounded very imperfect.
You have to.
In fact, when I record my podcast, I'm killing myself inside because I think my English is so bad. That's true. And I can't listen to it myself because I just hear all the mistakes I'm making.
Well, see, it sounds good to English speakers. So it's in some sense it's all in your head. You're hearing. You might be making things that are technically mistakes, which a native speaker wouldn't even think were mistakes, but to you who studied it, it's like, oh, I know that's wrong, and it just sort of rings in your head like, oh, how could I say that?
So my message is that if someone like me, I mean, I'm a very shy person, I'm very perfectionist, and I'm very afraid of how I sound. If I can learn 6 languages, then anybody can.
Right. 6. You can really talk to anybody in 6 languages today. If you could meet somebody from.
I can talk to anybody, but I'm not sure they will understand me. But I'll give it a try.
Right. That's the important thing. It's just physically doing it. I've been speaking here in Nørrebro with Louise Sand, who she puts out the Copenhagencast. It is a show about language learning, about learning Danish, about learning the Danish and Copenhagen culture. Louise, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for talking to me. It's nice.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. Special thanks to everyone who backed Season 4 on Kickstarter, including Joel Neville Anderson, Daniel Levin Becker, Paige Calvert, Commander Manvark, Jonathan Crow, John Cunningham, David Dawes, James DeVito, Tim Dobbs, Paul Doyle, Jake Elliott, Kevin Emmett, Lawrence English, Jonathan Filbert, Andrew Philippone Jr., Michael Fransky, John French, Themistocles Eucrucius, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Samuel Hansen, David Hayes, Jeff Hillenbrand, Mark Hines, Andrew Johnstone, Tadeusz Andrzej Kadlubowski, Peter Kavanagh, Ted Kane, Andy Cooney, Evan Landman, Alfred Lee, James Maloney, Sean McDonald, Alberto Bruzos Moro, Jason Miller, Rob Montz, Daniel Murphy, Richard Nash, Aidan Nullman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Ian Plosker, Christopher Porter, MJ Pritchett, Piers Rippey, Rob Schultz, Todd Shimoda, Cam Smith, Deborah Smith, Adam Sutherland, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Anna Traher, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, Nick Weigelt, John Wolfe, Cynthia Yang, and Wayne Wright.